I get the impression that morals are very different in The Last of Us than how we see things. I don't know so much that it's about morality, actually. I think morals are generally the same, but The Last of Us, I think, shows us that morals are really a privilege. That, like, morals don't matter in a world where you literally have to survive. So all of a sudden you start to see that, like, morals become these very cognitive constructs that when you have the ability to mostly control the world, like you, and like things are relatively safe, then all of a sudden we can have morals and we can all sit on our high horse and say, this is what I would do, blah, blah. But in this world that's in the game, morality doesn't matter, because morality in some ways can be the antithesis to you staying alive. And humans will go toward being alive more often than following a moral code. You've commented a lot on how beautiful. What'd you say? What, Sean?
I was going to say, I think that that's one of the biggest and most important things that you kept reiterating throughout your run was it's easy for us to make these judgments or these, predictions, I guess, if you want to call them. Wow, like we're like, wow, I would never do what Joel did there, or I would never do what any character would do.
Right.
And you kept reminding us, like, this is, the sensibilities are all fucking out the window because this is a completely different universe. This is like, this isn't, I'm going to the grocery store to get food. This is like, I'm going, for me to fucking eat today and for me to live, I have to do this, or
Yep.
I'm going to die, or I'm gonna get eaten by or killed by clickers and stuff. So I think you kept, and I think it's something you kind of get lost in while you're playing the game because you're just kind of playing the game. But to really get wrapped up in the story, it was a good reminder, like, hey, put yourself in these shoes, like genuinely put yourself in these shoes, because it's not going to be, and that helped a lot. I mean, I think that helped me a lot with 2.
Yeah.
And I liked 2, for the record. And so, but it did, I think even you telling me that enhanced my experience the second time watching you play through.
So something I promise I'm not going to go too far out in left field before I bring this back, but like something you learn when you go to school to be a therapist, and particularly to become a marriage and family therapist, is that you can never take context out of how you conceptualize something, and you also can't apply a non-related context to the context within which others are in. And because you run into problems when you do that. You start to take your own learned experiences, judgments, values, and you use those in order to make judgments of what's happening, where if the circumstances were flipped and we all lived in the world that Joel and Ellie and everybody else live in, that all of a sudden, when you take contextual factors into account, things make sense. And so hearing you say that and hearing so many people say that, like in comments on YouTube and stuff and TikTok, sort of like proves that like you can, even if it's something you don't like, if you apply enough context to it, it's understandable. And that really is the case in real life too. Like, I remember being a kid one time, and I think as all of you know in chat, like, I'm not a religious person at all, but I grew up Catholic. Me and Sean actually grew up in the same church. And I remember the first time I started to question it is I remember asking my dad, like, Dad, if I grew up in Madagascar, would I still be Catholic? And like, or if I grew up in, Israel or something, would I still be Catholic, or Saudi Arabia? The answer is no. And that was one of the first times where I realized, like, holy shit, context actually has like a really significant impact on stuff. So, all of that is to say that, like, in order for us to appreciate the games, I think we have to do that. We can't apply our sensibilities to what's happening in the game. We have to put ourselves in it. And I think one of the hallmarks of what makes Naughty Dog's storytelling and writing really solid is that it's clear that they wrote all of the characters with that in mind. They didn't apply today's contextual sensibilities to that context. And I think had they done that, the story would have been a mess. So, you've commented a lot on how beautiful the game is. I think you like the art design, but you mentioned being a speedrunner for Abby's section, so I'm betting the second half frustrated you as much as it did some of us. On the first time, it did. So, I did not like The Last of Us 2 the first time I played it. When I got to Abby's section, all I wanted was to get back to Ellie. That's all I wanted. And so I thought the Abby section was going to be as long as one of the flashbacks with Joel. And then when I realized it was 10 hours long, I was like, I felt like I had missed out on appreciating the Abby section because I had spent all of it just wanting to burn through it and get to Ellie because I was so invested in Joel and Ellie. I did not play this game with my therapist hat on the first time. I played it as somebody who just wanted to play a video game and enjoy it. So in that sense, I empathize a lot in some ways with people who do not like the game. However, as I thought might happen, playing the game as thoughtfully as I did this time and sherping all of you through it and taking the time to actually pay attention to the story and make it less about me and my desires and more about the characters and their desires, I freaking love it. Like, I completely changed my opinion on The Last of Us 2 by playing it this time. So, you can go ahead and pay out the skews towards like it for the prediction. Or I guess I can. But I do have gripes. The biggest change that I would make, there are two major changes that I would make for the game. Two of them. The first one is that I actually think Naughty Dog would have accomplished a more effective and engaging story that more people would have been able to appreciate and understand and hang in there with if they had started with Abby. I actually think that that would be the more logical path, and it makes it infinitely more interesting when you get to the point where she kills Joel, because you would be in that room in the moment understanding that entire collision. Like, all of a sudden you're Abby and you're running through, you're in Jackson, and like you like having more context for that, or you don't even go to Jackson and see that flashback, you just see Abby and it's pitched as another story, like another Last of Us story, and then all of a sudden you see the way that it merged. I think that would be huge, because then you would actually feel this huge amount of conflict when you're sitting. I told you guys way back in Mass Effect 2, I really wish that that games and game developers would push for dissonance more without doing it as like a shock factor. And I think that they could have accomplished it with that, because if they had advertised the game as being about Abby and only had tiny little allusions to Ellie and Joel in the trailers and promos, I think people would have found it to be more palatable. So that's my one gripe, is I actually think the pacing is a little bit jarring. I don't like that you go from Abby standing over Tommy with a gun to playing as Abby for 10 hours. Even if they had done the parallel process of timing, I actually think that would have been more effective. But that piece of pacing for the story has never really made sense to me. That said, playing it this time, where it was all about trying to make sure that when we were Abby, we played as Abby and we took our experience out of it, it made it completely different for me, and I was totally fine with it. So I think that might have been a better way to go about it, because I think you can leverage people's psychology more effectively in doing it that way. My second gripe with the game is that I actually think there's too much gratuitous violence in the game. The biggest example of it would be that moment when you're running through the Seraphite village and then Abby runs into that dude with the hammer and you basically like slice his cheeks open and shit and you like are in that fight for a long time. I don't think there's any need for that fight. That doesn't add anything to what's happening because you literally have watched Yara get mowed down by WLF. You watched Isaac get shot by Yara. You see an entire burning village while you're with a kid who just killed his mother. There's a little bit more gratuitous. Like, some of the violence is more gratuitous than it is useful for the storytelling. Like, the world's brutal enough already without having to have certain segments where it's literally just gore porn. That for me is, I think, the part that I struggle with the most. I'm okay with like the violence along the way and the violence that makes sense, but when there's extra just kind of thrown in there, you already have a really gruesome and awful world. I don't know how. I mean, did you experience the same thing with the violence? Because I remember you telling me before I played Last of Us 2, you were like, dude, you need to buckle up because it's super violent. But like, how do you feel about all of that?
Killing the dogs was the worst part for me. I hated to. And you have like there are parts where you have to. I can't. Is it Bear?
You have to kill Alice.
Yes, her.
That happens in a cutscene.
That got to me a lot. I'm trying to remember the scene that you're talking about because I can't remember exactly.
You're like me. You talking about the Seraphite village? You're like running through the town and that dude shows up with a hammer and you like have to basically have the same boss fight with him as you have with Ellie, where like Abby's cutting him up.
Oh, okay.
And he's like, and then like he's standing over you and he's got like Joker face and stuff.
Okay, I'll have to look for it because I just do not remember this part. To me, I was thinking about this where I play so many games now, and the violence does not do like I'll shoot whoever, and the biggest reaction is like, oh shit, and that's it. But this made me stop a lot. Like I literally had to stop playing the game sometimes because it was like, fuck, man.
Yeah.
Like. And to me, there's purpose to it where I can understand it feeling like gratuitous violence, and I 100% understand that point. But to me, it actually made me think about the stuff that I was doing where it's not just simply like, I mean, you could play it the way where you're just like, fuck it, man, all right, let's go, and you're blowing people up and stuff. But this, like, made me think about it more than, like, when I'm playing Call of Duty and I'm sniping people or whatever game it is. And I think it made me uncomfortable. And I think that's the purpose, that's the goal. And it did a good job of making me think about actually if I had to kill people and stuff to progress. It was like there are ways where I think it probably could have been executed better, and making you kind of regret stuff in like making these decisions if you do. But it was, I don't know. I kind of go back and forth with it where I want to think that they put it in for a reason. It's kind of like movies where like movies, every scene should have a purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
Should have a purpose. So if they put this stuff in the game, it should serve a purpose. And so like that scene right there that you're talking about, like this is the norm for everything that the Seraphites go through, that WLF go through, that Abby and them all go through. Like this is their day-to-day kind of shit that they have to deal with. And I think for you to be like, yeah, this is just awful. And I think that that's furthering the point of like, this is constant. This is every fucking day for them. Like, this is why people are doing the shit they do, because they don't want that to happen to them, or, you know, something along those lines. And so the violence definitely did get to me in this game, but I think it got to me in ways that no other game has gotten to me, because I was actually thinking about what was happening, what I was doing, more than anything, because it's so fucking personal. And to answer your question, Scott, yes, it did bother me when they were actually calling out names, and I knew immediately why they were doing that.
Yeah.
And it kind of tied back into what they were trying to accomplish with Abby's story initially, where it's like, okay, because Last of Us, it's like you are tunnel vision Joel and Ellie. That is it. And this is broadening the whole universe the game takes place in of, okay, yes, Joel and Ellie are also doing something, but you know what? You've got everybody else doing something too. And whether you agree with them or not, obviously it's a whole different argument, but yes.
Well, you have I mean, you have different factions that are all across the U.S. that I think, I mean, is representative of like just the fact that like even right now, right? Like we live in different countries with different doctrines and different rule sets and different ideologies and all these things. But ultimately, every system that's set up is set up to help people survive. And this is like a, you know, this is like you're saying, this is a ridiculously brutal world. And like, I appreciate that it's something that was, you know, designed to make us uncomfortable. I think in some ways it accomplishes that. And like, I also think though, at the same time, if I was to think about, if I'm a storyteller and I'm trying to, like, you have to make a decision if you're Naughty Dog when you create this game. You have to make a decision of, do I want the player to have a parallel emotional experience to the people that they're playing as, or do I want the player to have a dissonant experience to the role of the, like, to what the player you're playing as is doing, right? So I think Naughty Dog it seems like Naughty Dog wanted us, the player, to experience a parallel experience to Ellie, right? We see Joel's redemptive character arc end up being his downfall, and then we watch Joel get killed in cold blood as Ellie is basically screaming for all of us. And then Ellie going on the journey that she goes on, I think many of us can get behind, right? Like, we can look at it and say, okay, well, what happened to Joel was really brutal, and I hate that, right? Like, I hate that violence because it was violence that was inflicted on somebody that I care about and somebody who I have seen redeem himself to the best of his ability. And so I take that violence personally, and I think in some ways it makes the violence, if you really immerse yourself in Ellie's context and think about the world you're in, I think it makes it more palatable for us, for Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the same time, we have a bit of a dissonant experience as it relates to Abby. Because where Ellie very clearly seems to be bothered by all of the violence that she's conducting, right? Like, it's very clear throughout the thing that despite the fact she's driven by rage, she is still bothered by what decisions she's making along the path, right? You see that in the moment where where she takes her shirt off and Dina's with her and like she's like shaking. Like, Ellie is obviously rocked by the violence in the same way we are. But when you get to Abby, if Naughty Dog wants you to have a parallel process with the characters that are happening in the game, I think putting in uncomfortable and gratuitous violence into Abby's storyline doesn't make sense. Because if Abby has grown up in this world and has essentially been desensitized to the violence to the point that she's willing to kind of do what she's doing, and where, like you were saying, right, like this is the world they live in, I think at that point, then you would want us to see the violence the way that like a person sees the violence in Call of Duty, where like it's just kind of part of the game and you don't really think much about it, because that's the kind of mindset you have to have in order to be Abby in the world and in the context that she grew up in. So what was really surprising for me, and why I think that moment where you're in the Seraphite village and you fight that guy stands out to me, is it's very clearly designed in a way to make us uncomfortable, but there's not really any reason why Abby would be uncomfortable in that moment, because that's a kind of like brutality and stuff that she's so used to, right? Like, she runs through a raised village and basically says nothing. And I think that makes sense for her. And then when she's at the end and she's like, I don't want to fight you, Ellie, like, she could, she just chooses not to. And so Naughty Dog flipping from a parallel experience for the player to a dissonant experience for the player, I think is part of why it's hard for people to grapple with Abby. Because not only are you playing as somebody that it's hard to see objectively because this is a person that you just saw kill Joel like 3 hours ago, you're also being exposed to world information and context that Abby is very likely not experiencing the same way you are, which makes it that much harder to empathize with Abby. I hope that makes sense. I just talked for a long time, but like I think about that a lot when I'm playing games of like, what is our experience relative to the characters? And that's why I felt like with Ellie, I didn't have to say things like, when we're Ellie, we're playing as Ellie and we're thinking about her context. I had to do that with Abby. Like I had to really intentionally push myself into as neutral of a place as I could in order to fully appreciate her story arc.
Fair. I agree with that. I think we had the luxury too of going through a whole game with Ellie, so it was easier to get on board with Ellie than with Abby as well. And I do think the point you brought up with flipping the storylines a little bit would have been an interesting one.
Yeah, it's hard for me to like fully articulate. Like I think about it a lot. In my mind, I can see the trajectory of how that order of operations goes, where you create like truly what I think would be one of the most like iconic moments in gaming history for a good reason, not for the reason that it is, which is that like people just were shocked that Joel got killed.
Mm-hmm.
Did you expect to finish Last of Us 2 last stream? Yes, I did. The Abby Ellie fight seemed like watching two wounded animals locked in a desperate battle. It pretty much was. This is a random question, but do you agree with killing Joel? It doesn't matter what I think about that. So here's the thing. People get so hung up. I'm going to soapbox for a minute. People get so hung up on Joel dying. And I think Joel's death exposes everybody who plays the game. It exposes our sense of entitlement as people who consume other people's stories. Naughty Dog didn't owe us Joel living. Joel died. That's what happened, right? Like I think we're averse to Joel's death in the same way that I think so many of us want to deny things like school shootings and random acts of violence and random acts of God, right? Like if I walked outside after this stream and got struck by lightning and died, that whether you want that to happen, whether you think that's fair that it happened, doesn't matter. It's what happened. And so even though Naughty Dog created the story, if we get that too meta, I don't know why we're playing the game, right? Like if we're looking at a game and we're going like, well, this is how the developer decided that this was going to go. All of a sudden, like it's the same thing as like looking at a movie and being like, well, the director had this person do this instead of this. Ultimately, we're consuming the media for what it is. This is the story that happened in the same way that World War II happened. The same way that like any kind of bad thing that's ever happened in the world that was unfair happened. Like I think it would be, to me, it's no better to have Joel like, you know, live with Ellie for a long time and then die of cancer than it is to have him brutally murdered, because at the end of the day, no matter which narrative path is chosen, that's what happened. So people getting lit up about the fact that Joel died speaks to a sense of gamer entitlement, that this game should go in the direction that I want it to go. I'm so used to playing God in these RPGs where I get to decide the paths. Like we've gotten so inundated with video games that allow us to have these like multiple endings and shit like that, that reeling this back in and saying, this is the narrative. This is what happened. Do you think Ellie likes that Joel died that way? No. I don't. I mean, do I like that Joel died that way? No. Do I like that there's a cordyceps infection that's destroyed humanity? No. I don't like basically anything that's happened in The Last of Us. Even this wonderful story we have with Joel and Ellie happens in the context of misery. So to me, it's so unfair to go after Naughty Dog for Joel's death, because you got to see Joel's character development. You got to see the key moments in Ellie's memories of Joel leading up to when he died. You got to see when she went to the museum with him. That is, to me, the culmination of everything any gamer ever wanted for Joel and Ellie. And I don't understand how Joel's death negates the fact that we literally got what we wanted in that moment. We get to see the moments where Ellie questions Joel. We get to actually see the moment where he discloses that he lied to her. We get to see at the end of the game the moment when she said that she wanted to try to forgive him. I don't know what more we should want there. We got Joel and Ellie in the story. So Joel's death being as polarizing as it is, I think speaks more to the personal sense of entitlement that people in the gaming community have for feeling a sense of ownership over Joel and Ellie's relationship, even though we didn't actually control Joel and Ellie. We just kind of played as them while their story went on. There is literally no choice we make in The Last of Us 1. None. Ellie and Joel are destined to form a relationship, and Joel is destined to, every time you play The Last of Us 1, Joel kills the surgeon. There's no such thing as a version of The Last of Us 1 where Joel does not kill the surgeon. You play that story every single time. So we are bystanders in this story. It would be no different than if like somebody came into your life and said, you should have become a doctor for me. Right? Like, I don't like the decision you made career-wise. You should do this for me. That's essentially what we're doing to Joel and Ellie when we say things like, I don't like that Joel died that way and it's bullshit and it shouldn't have been that. That's what happened. Like, I wish Hitler didn't kill millions of Jews, but that's what happened, right? We have to take that data and decide, how do we conceptualize that? What led up to that? How do we prevent that type of thing from happening again? So it's a big soapbox I have. I've had it for a long time. I thought it was fine that Joel died the first time I played the game. Till the end of time, I'm going to believe that it was totally fine for them to kill Joel. I really don't see it as being a bad thing. That's my opinion on it. Now, I mean, I'm open to people talking about, like, I don't really, I don't like it. Here's why. Maybe it was too brutal. Maybe the pacing of it didn't work for me. Like, that's fine. I don't like that Joel died either. I just don't think that I'm not entitled to Joel living there. I think that's a ridiculous notion. This, as I said to you all on the last section of the game, this game is not about us. This game is about them. If you personalize a video game, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. So, right? I don't like that he died, but that's what happened. I don't like that Ellie had to die in order to try and make a vaccine, but that's what the information was at the time. That was how the Fireflies conceptualized it. Like, everything that happens in that game sucks ass. I was tired every night I went to bed after I was done playing The Last of Us 2. Every single night I was exhausted at the end of the playthrough, and would didn't even sleep great because my brain was like on fire every night going to bed. But it was because I was so invested in like trying to understand and contextualize their stories instead of making it about me. Isn't personalizing games kind of the whole point of playing story games, though? I think it is when it's a game that's designed for you to make the decisions. Like Mass Effect, for example. I actually understand why the player base was super pissed about the ending of Mass Effect 3. I completely understand that, because up until that point, the entire design of the game is that your decisions in that game world matter and have consequence. The Last of Us is not that game. The Last of Us is not Detroit Become Human. It's not Mass Effect. It's not any game that ever gives you dialogue decisions. The Last of Us is you basically reading a book. You just get to kind of interact with it and loot the world. Which brings me to another point, which is that I actually don't like Naughty Dog's gameplay loop at all. In some ways, I'm actually more excited for the show than I am for like ever playing these two games again, because for me, playing the game is a lot more like watching a show than it is playing a video game.
You don't like opening drawers?
No, dude, I only like opening drawers and doing the looting when you play on Grounded, because you have to do it, right? Like in that, it makes sense to do it in that. I was saying this to Sean. I'm sorry, because I'm repeating shit I said to you the other night.
You're good.
But so there's this whole thing about ludonarrative dissonance. I don't know if y'all have heard of this. It's a thing that Naughty Dog kind of talked about a lot, is like the idea that they wanted the deaths to matter in the game and all this stuff. I actually think the piece of ludonarrative dissonance that doesn't make sense in my mind is the fact that there is so much urgency in the game, yet the design of the game is to slow you down and make you explore everything. That actually is the hardest thing for me, because there were times where like I wanted to just stop and enjoy the environment and look around. But if you're the characters in that, you wouldn't do that, right? Like when you're Ellie and you get to California and you know where Abby is, you wouldn't waste your time walking through the house looking for remnants of notes. You would go immediately try to find Abby. That's the dissonance that drives me nuts in Naughty Dog games like that. So I'm curious to know, did the game have any warnings about how this game could be sensitive for some players? I only watched you play and I had to take several hours some nights to decompress. It's not my place to judge, but I feel it could have pushed some people too far to where they might not ever play it again or even finish it for the first time. I would say that there was decently sufficient warning, but I don't really know how Naughty Dog could say, like, by the way, this is probably the most violent video game you're ever going to play without turning people off from it. Like, I think you probably know what you're getting into when you play The Last of Us 1, but that's why it's rated M.
I was going to say that could speak to maybe ESRB ratings needing, I mean, because you and I work at GameStop, so we're well aware of, like, people not fully, like the mom coming in and buying Saints Row for her kids. Like, do you know what this game is? Like,
Yep.
Like, so maybe, I mean, that's like as big of a, without reading a review or watching a review or anything, that's your ticket of like, okay, what's going on in this game, and maybe they need to adjust that stuff for like, yo, this game fucking intense.
A lot of reviewers said that too. A lot of reviewers were like, this is going to be the most violent game you've ever played.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with the fact they killed off Joel. I think what made his death shocking and at first upsetting was that I felt deceived by Naughty Dog. All the trailers and marketing seemed to indicate that Joel was going to be alive along for the ride. I can appreciate a great story even if characters I love die, but I don't like being deceived. It would have been just as easy to market without letting the he dies and not editing game moments to put him where he isn't. So the editing of game moments, I totally understand that. That was bad. Full disclosure, actually, Professor Claire, I never saw a single trailer for The Last of Us 2 before I played it. And I actually, Sean will tell you this, I don't really pay attention to game marketing at all. I don't really care about it. I don't even care about Destiny marketing. Like, I don't pay attention to trailers and stuff of things before they come out. Because to me, in some ways, trailers themselves are spoilery. Like, if you tell me that a new Batman movie's coming out, I'm just going to go watch it. Like, I don't need trailers to get me hyped about it. So I never saw the trailers ahead of time. And so I can certainly understand why people saw the trailers, because I've seen the way that it was changed. I can certainly understand why people felt misled in that. Like, that to me makes complete sense. But I'm not a person who really consumes trailers, so it didn't have much of a effect on me. Do you think the game would have received a different response if it didn't release during a pandemic? No. No, I think it would have still split people right down the middle because of just how gamers are. Like, I really, like I say, the reaction to The Last of Us 2, I think, is indicative of the sense of entitlement that gamers have over the games they play more than anything else. And I think Naughty Dog knew that was going to piss people off. And honestly, I applaud them for saying, this is what we're going to release. This is the story that we have. This is the story we made. So with Abby, after she goes back for Lev and Yara, her nightmare flashback changes. It was a turning point for her trauma. I think that if she hit that point as she was killing Joel, it might have saved him, similar to how Ellie's flashback to Joel was only his death until it changed to her last conversation. It saved Abby's life. If Ellie didn't have that change, I feel she would have killed her. It's great to see the impact trauma can have before the host can grapple it better. 100%, Shelves. I could not have said it better myself. 100%.
I saw Shelves made a good point too earlier of Ellie essentially saved Abby and Lev, because chances are they would have died if she did. I mean, obviously her intentions were to kill her. So, but with the circumstances that happened, she ended up saving both of them. I remember thinking, You go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm reading some of the messages right now. I honestly, like, this is the conversation about the trailers is always hard for me because I just don't care. Like, for me, like, I don't know. I just don't care. I also think that, like, in some ways that's what reviewers are for. I mean, like, reviewers were very clear that it was not exactly what they expected from the trailer. I don't know. I think people get so overly invested in trailers that, like, then you're screwed when you go to play the game. I don't know. The trailer thing doesn't land for me. I don't know too much about the details of his life, but I know the lead writer of this game grew up in a war zone. I think it really shows in a way he deals with these more intense subject matters in a way that is understandably really unsettling for most average folks. That's something I thought a lot while working on it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about Neil Willow. But yeah, that makes complete sense to me. Also, Willow, I appreciate you popping in tonight. It's been wonderful to have you here for streams. My heart is warm knowing that, like, somebody at Naughty Dog knows that I did this run. I just really want you to know that that means a lot to me. And thank you again for crafting such an incredibly beautiful world. Back to the discussion on gameplay. Any Naughty Dog game outside of Jak and Daxter are more fun to watch than personally play. I like both Last of Us games. I'm looking forward to everything that comes next, be it the upcoming show or future games. Last of Us is a masterclass in storytelling. I think the show will be great. Looking forward to it. Yeah, no, I agree. I can't get on board with the whole we were led to believe Joel would be along for the ride argument, because Joel absolutely was along for the ride. He was like that. Seriously, like, Jesus, we got so many moments with Joel. Like, it's not like Joel died in the first hour and then we never saw him again. Like, we got to see character development for him and Ellie. I don't know what more I would have wanted from them. I really don't. Because, like I said to you guys the last night, I think it's incredibly tragic that Joel died before Ellie had the opportunity to say thank you and to bring herself to forgive him. Like that, and he died thinking that Ellie was also going to die. He died with the thought being, I didn't protect Tommy and Ellie. Like, Joel's death to me is so incredibly tragic. Despite the fact that he did possibly have it coming, I can understand why. Obviously, I understand why Abby killed him. But, like, god damn, man. That man's last moments would have been the ultimate soul crusher for him. Like, the ultimate soul crusher. Really glad you generally do great work, and I love the concept of your show here. I had a point in my life where I wanted to be a therapist, so it's really great intersection of my interests. That's so cool. Hackmaster, good to see you. I know there was a similar outrage as Metal Gear Solid 2 when it came to the you lied to us. Yeah, yeah, Sean played Metal Gear Solid 2, so
you and I literally just talked about that.
Yeah, Joel's moments were powerful. So many lessons they were. So the point that I thought of today when I was between sessions that I want to share with all of you, that I never said at any point during the playthrough. And I think this spawns a little bit from the conversation, the final conversation that we saw between Joel and Ellie, where she says that she wants to bring herself to forgive him. And she says, like, I was supposed to be the cure. That was supposed to be my purpose. So I thought about this later as, like, in the context of caregiving. And I think one of the things that we talked about many times in these games was that, like, you have like basically two things that drive people in this world. You have, other than the desire to survive, it's vengeance or caretaking. And, like, those are the two things that people find themselves in a camp of like giving them some level of purpose and reason to continue pushing on to live. So Joel got that filled by the time that Ellie and him got to Utah. Like, when they got to Salt Lake City and Joel says, you know, we don't have to do this, that is absolutely, to me, an indication that Joel has found his role as a caregiver and that he's good with that, right? Like, I now have my purpose and reason to survive. This little girl here that I get to take care of. And that's why he goes on to make the decision that he makes in the hospital, you know, all of that stuff. Like, his need for caregiving and purpose is fulfilled. Ellie's is not at that point. Ellie is not conceptualizing herself as on this world to take care of Joel. She's a kid. All Ellie knows and has developed for herself, in addition to hearing it from people that have taken care of her, including Joel in the initial part of the game, and especially when he talks to Tommy in Colorado and says she's the cure for humanity, so get her ass to the Fireflies. Ellie's way of taking care of the world is to be the cure. So the caregiving that Ellie latches herself onto is, I get to make sure that other people don't have to experience the pain of this. I get to be a beacon of hope. I'm the one that is different enough that can take care of generations of humans that don't want to deal with this again. So when she wakes up in the back of that car and she learns from Joel, who's trying to take care of her in that moment and fulfill his duty as a caretaker, and Joel says there were plenty more like you and there isn't a cure, Ellie no longer knows how to take care, like what to take care of. She doesn't have that drive anymore. And I think that that's where she loses herself. And then we see as she gets older and she starts to think more critically about it. I mean, Ellie is essentially looking for somebody to take care of, and I don't think she wants that to be Joel, because I don't think Joel will allow that, because her taking care of Joel means that he can't take care of her. And I don't think Joel's sophisticated enough in his like caregiving sensibilities to do that in a like good way. So Ellie's kind of looking elsewhere, trying to figure out, what do I take care of, because this was stripped away from me, and she's mad at Joel for taking that away from her. That her seeing Joel dies, then she gets to latch onto the purpose of vengeance, right? Like that's what gets her there. And then we see her only be able to go down that line, and we even see that caretaking for Dina and little baby Potato doesn't even matter that much for her, because she's still so locked into vengeance. That's the powerful force for her in that moment. And I think that's because her primary conceptualization of caregiving was taken away from her. I've had that whole thought within it took me 15 fucking minutes to say that. I had that whole thought in 2 minutes when I was between sessions today. But I just wanted to add that because I think that's another way to look at what happened there. I just want to say I'm incredibly impressed with how true to reality Naughty Dog was when handling trauma, and how it impacts the brain, how humans respond and struggle with it, and how it absolutely obliterates a person's life if they allow it. It's so impressive. I was blown away. I've never seen anyone be able to get an understanding of trauma across like they did. I'm grateful the game exists. Yeah, I agree, Shelbs. I wish we got more moments like the first of us, like when Henry killed himself. Like they didn't have to show Henry, and they showed how Joel reacted, and it was perfect. Yeah, I mean, that's part of, I think, what I mean when I say Last of Us 2 got a little bit more gratuitous. Because we know the world sucks. Like, I don't think we have to be convinced after playing The Last of Us 1. There was initially a version of his death where he murmurs Sarah's name, but they decided against it. If it's any consolation, I don't think he was very conscious of his surroundings at that moment, or at least what it was like to, I think. Or at least that's what I like to think. We'll never know. But I do think there's a very specific moment where the camera shows Joel's face and he's looking directly at Ellie. And it seems like he has some level of understanding that Ellie's laying there screaming toward him.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Yes, I did play the DLC, Willow. And yeah, I would agree with that, right? Like Ellie losing her childhood best friend and her family, presumably with the way it's talked about in the first game. Joel really is her only human attachment at the point they end up at the hospital. Yes. She even says as much in Jackson when she says, like, everybody's left me except for you. And I think, and like I say, you know, when she's the age that she is, when Joel makes that initial decision in Last of Us 1, I think her seeing Joel lie to her and the fact that he saved her is endearing to her, because it's something that nobody else has ever done for her. But I think as she grew older and she starts to differentiate herself, which is a process that we humans go through when we get into our teens. Differentiation is where you start to recognize your own values and emotional experiences separate from the values and emotions of the people around you, and your learned orientation towards those things. As Ellie starts to develop more of a core sense of self in that moment, that stops being endearing and starts being something she's resenting him for. Because it was either her life or her purpose that he was going to take away. Joel can't win in that moment. And neither can Ellie, really. Right? Like, I either lose my life or I lose my purpose. My biggest issue with the game, Jesse's death should have been a bigger moment. I actually don't agree. I look at it similar to like Game of Thrones, where I think if you make every main character's death a big theatrical key moment that's like amped up and built up and all this stuff, I actually think you do the reality of that world a disservice. The fact of the matter is, Abby shooting Jesse the way she did when he ran through the door is exactly how that would go. It's exactly how that would go. She was protecting herself. She's trained. Like, that's no different than like if you're on a SWAT team and some guy who's holding somebody hostage comes running through the door. Like, you're gonna open fire. Like, I mean, that is exactly what would happen. That would have been Ellie if she went in first. Like, that legitimately, Ellie would have been the one that took a bullet to her head if she'd have been the first one to run out instead of Jesse. So I actually think that like making some of the, like Manny's death, for example, is another one. It was not theatrical. He got shot by Tommy. He dropped, and Abby had to go in and protect herself. I think you need that because if you make everybody's life a big deal, I think it also conversely makes the other deaths of people you don't know that much more like distant from yourself. Seeing Jesse die the same way that you kill other soldiers, that makes it more of a real experience in my opinion.
I think too, it fits the moment. Like Jesse's, for example, we're playing as Ellie. She doesn't have time to think about, like, she sees like Jesse's dead, but then she immediately has to address the situation of Abby's in there. And then the same thing with Manny, like you just said, you've got Tommy shooting. She acknowledges it, sees it, but then like you've got to keep going. And so I do like that you made the effort too, because I don't think I did this honestly because I forgot of Ellie's journal, and I like that adds a lot. I think it adds a lot of context to a lot of moments. And I like that you took time to read through it because I think she's got the moments. I think that she writes about Jesse in there.
Oh yeah,
and whatnot. So, and same thing with Potato being in there. Obviously, Potato is a big reference to Jesse in obvious ways. But
yeah, I think like you're. I know I'm a broken record at this point, right? But connection being the antithesis to survival. If Ellie pays attention in that moment, if she directs her attention to her care for Jesse, or if Abby directs her focus to her care for Jesse, or for Manny, they're both dead. You don't have time in this world to care when you're in a crisis situation, because every crisis situation is legit deadly. We have a luxury to be if anything, it makes me reflect on the luxury we have to be able to grieve when people die, even if unexpectedly. You know, like in this world, you don't get that. And it's cold and brutal, man. Troy Baker said in an interview that he was trying to get across Joel's face about how he failed and the anger on his face without letting his guard down so easily, but he couldn't manage it. It's because that's incredibly difficult. I don't know that anybody could really convey that unless they've been there. But yeah, I mean, I still hold firm that the thing that really traumatized Ellie, besides the fact that she didn't have influence and an ability to get through that moment, is that she saw Joel essentially give up.
Yeah.
I know we don't know anything about this, but what do you think the mental implications are for Ellie not being able to be in Potato's life? I don't know that it... I mean, I have no way of knowing this, but I don't know if it matters to her. And I say that because she made a very clear decision when Dina set the boundary before she left. I think Ellie can make a distinction that, like, she cares for Potato, but Potato's... I mean, sort of a remnant of Jesse and Dina's relationship and whatever distance there might have been there. And so, like, I don't know. I mean, some people hypothesize that Ellie's walking to Jackson after that to go try to figure it out. I think Ellie going back to Dina and Potato and trying to, like, win them back over is maybe a little, like, I don't know that I could call it noble. I mean, it's certainly a decision, but I just don't know how Dina can come back from that. Dina was very clear. You choose me or Joel here. You know, and Dina could have been around to help Ellie process that. But Ellie made her decision, and that's the bed she has to lay in. So I don't know that it matters much. I don't know that it would matter much to Ellie. You think Ellie was going off to suicide after the second playthrough's ending? I kind of do, yeah. There's still I mean, if I was a pie chart, the biggest percentage of that pie chart for me is that Ellie is gonna end her life.
Even I don't know. I don't. To me, I don't think that's what she's doing. I honestly don't know.
Right? None of us know. That's the fun of it.
No, I know. But me think. I mean, I know you just said the pie chart thing, so there's all these other parts of the pie. But to me, it'd be surprising that she would do that after every. But maybe it would make sense that she does do that after everything. I don't know. To me personally, going through that, that's not what I think she's doing. I don't know. Like you said, that's the fun of it. That's where open-ended movies like this is the inception, the top spinning at the end. Like, oh my god. It never came across to me that that's what she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's interesting. So.
Ooh, on a psychological level, I have a strange and unique experience the average player won't ever experience. I think you might find it interesting. One of the things we did was scan a few people at the studio for NPCs and enemies. At one point, seeing a super kind older lady I worked with running at me with an axe as a seraphite, me shooting her, and then seeing the dead face of someone I know and really was like a genuinely shocking and upsetting. Oh my god.
Wow. God.
That's actually, that's really interesting, Willow, and I don't know that I'd have thought of that. Like, I know that Abby is fully face capped, and I wonder what that's like. Yeah, man, that's nuts. That would be wild. Thank you for sharing that. I wouldn't have even considered that. I didn't even think about the fact that maybe NPCs were actually modeled off of real faces. I watched you snipe a friend of mine the other night. That's crazy. Oh my god. I wish Isaac's death was treated differently, but I can't decide how. See, I actually, and I say this with love, DC, I actually don't find those conversations to be interesting, because it doesn't matter what we want for Isaac's death. It doesn't matter how interesting or uninteresting they are. It's just what they are. Like, that's just how Isaac died. And there's, I think, a simple beauty to that. That we have to look at it for what it is, not what we wish it was. If she was going to suicide, I think she would have done it on the beach in Santa Barbara. I don't know. I think Ellie needed to see that Dina followed through with her boundary.
Yeah.
I think Ellie seeing that and not being able to play the guitar, those two things are huge.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just trying to think. I don't even remember why this talking about. This is kind of a side thought with this, but I remember the optimist in me thinking Ellie got to Santa Barbara and she was going to get there and be like, I'm here to kill Abby. And then she runs into, is it the Rattlers? She runs into them and realizes, like, oh my God, this is fucked up. They've got Abby. And I thought she would get there and see just how, like, disheveled and, like, just the shit they went through, that she was going to try to save, like, at least see them and save them and let them go. And then obviously the sequence happens and what it is. But it's funny looking back, like, I think that's where, like, that you were talking about the entitlement thing of, like, that's how I wanted it to go. Like, I wanted the good ending. I wanted Ellie to not keep doing what she was doing, because she was already going to such an extreme.
Yep.
Find her again, and so, and I wanted her to not. And at that point, I had come around to Abby, and I wanted her and Lev to succeed.
Yep.
And do whatever they were doing, and it was just like at that point I was emotionally exhausted and drained, and so but I thought coming
Here,
back
keep talking for a second. I'm gonna go tuck Ellie in while you keep talking in chat. I'll be right back.
Okay. But I remember talking about the sense of entitlement thing, and I thought that was interesting because that's kind of how I felt with. I wanted that with Ellie, and obviously that is not the story. And I get that that's that's a story that Naughty Dog told, and it is what it is, and I'm grateful I got to play the game in that capacity. But yeah. I know he's probably going to say it, but chat, big cheers to you all. I genuinely do love you all with how this run has been going, because this game these are tense games to go through and experience, and it's been super endearing, and I love seeing you all here and being able to talk about this stuff. So I know he's going to say it at some point, but I'm going to say it right now. So
all right, you're saying the thing. Yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
All right, let me catch up really quick on some stuff. Cassandra, thank you for the 550 bits. Thank you to the people that are following. I appreciate that. Huge shout out to you and Sean for the reach off platform. I told TKF years ago that EDU needs to bring new viewers to Twitch, but nobody gets it. Seeing so many new viewer comments in chat during this series has warmed my heart far more than I can express. It's a rare and precious thing. Thank you, Uncle Bill. I appreciate you, man. After having played through both Last of Us games during the streams, has your opinion of The Last of Us 2 changed? Yes, it has. I went from not really liking the game to absolutely loving it by doing it the way that I did it this time. Thank you for the bits, Cassandra. Have you heard the term Dark Night of the Soul? I think that's what Ellie and Abby go through in The Last of Us. I actually have not heard that phrase before. I feel like Ellie was going to go back to Jackson to look for Dina, and here's why. When she goes into the art room, Dina had left a record that Ellie played for them on top of the guitar. It felt like a nod of love, and you did what you had to do, and so did I. And Ellie had Dina's bracelet on. Ellie also wrote multiple times on her way to get Abby about how she missed JJ and drew him and Dina on before her last page. Just my thoughts. It very well could be the case. Like I could get just as on board with that as I could with Ellie ending her life. So I that's the beautiful. It's like I said, it's like Inception, right? Does the top finish spinning or not? I love those types of endings because it allows us to dump our projections into it. For those that worked on the game, it's pretty much kill your coworkers. The game. Yeah. You can't change your opinion. It's like illegal or something. You absolutely can. All right, so I want to open it up. I know Sean and I have done quite a bit of talking here. I want to open it up for questions. You're all welcome to kind of like ask me stuff. We can elaborate on things. You can ask for my opinion. I don't mind if there are duplicate questions. I know people come and go. If you want to share thoughts on the run and what you thought of watching me play it, how it might have impacted you, I'm open to that kind of stuff too. But I now we can be a little bit more chat interactive. If you have specific questions for Sean, just make sure you tag him. But we'll just kind of chat now that you've heard a little bit of my like overarching thoughts of the series. I really think what Naughty Dog accomplished with the two games is incredible. Which doggo is the best doggo in the lineup of doggos at the WLF camp? Nutmeg. 100%. Out the door. Do you think the TV show might trivialize the story as sometimes they do when they convert books to shows? We'll find out. Did Abby's note from Ellie's Santa Barbara impact your thoughts on their relationship? Abby's note from Ellie's Santa Barbara impact your thoughts on their relationship? I don't know which note you're referring to, Sir Chai. Do you know which one?
No, I was just thinking.
I can't think which one that is. My biggest characterization issue is Owen. He seems so hot and cold on Abby versus Mel. Thoughts? Oh, yes. I think Mel was a oh man, okay. All right. Bear with me here, chat. What have you done, Scott? Okay. I think there's a duality going on with Owen as it relates to Mel and Abby, and I'm going to try to explain this as best I possibly can. There are, I think, two major ingredients to a really fulfilling, long-lasting, deep relationship. The first one is consistency and reliability as it relates to just proximity and like emotional connection, etc. And the second one is chemistry. And chemistry is a little bit more of a luxury for folks than consistency and reliability is. I think Abby represents for Owen chemistry, and Mel represents more consistency and reliability, because Abby had ulterior motives. Abby was not as invested in that relationship. They were not as communicative as they could have been. Abby and Owen, from what we saw, did not really communicate in a way that would have facilitated that consistency and reliability of emotional connection and like directness. So I think what happened was when Owen, like, which by the way, consistency and reliability is going to override in a survival situation than chemistry is. Chemistry is a lot more of a privilege in a relationship than that reliability. And so I think what happened is Owen became distressed, and because Abby was good chemistry but not reliable in terms of her proximity, Owen turned to somebody who was and was willing to sacrifice the chemistry. But then what happened is when Abby came back, Owen experienced a simultaneous combination of those two things. He had the security and reliability of Mel, but he had the chemistry with Abby. And because he had the consistency and reliability with Mel, he was more willing to explore and engage with that chemistry with Abby. And he kind of tried to have his cake and eat it too, because he knew that even if Abby didn't work out, he had the consistency and reliability. And I think it put Owen in a really tough jam because he didn't have a therapist there with him to help him understand how to sort that out, and realize that like forging consistency and reliability with Abby was going to be more work than it was with Mel, in the same way that forging chemistry with Mel was going to be more work. But the thing is, I don't think chemistry is something that you can really create with a person. I think consistency and reliability absolutely is. And I think Owen knows that. So Owen already has the harder piece to get with Abby, thus he tries to pursue consistency, doesn't get it, converts it over to Mel because that's what you need in these moments for just connection, and that puts him in that awful rock in a hard place. I hope that answered that question. I don't feel like I talked about Owen enough during the run.
He linked the note in Discord if you wanted to look and
cool,
share your thoughts on it.
All right, I'll look at it real quick. So the good info I traded those fish for turned out to be bogus. Despite our repeated dead ends, my gut tells me the fireflies are in Santa Barbara somewhere. I'm picturing the shark I'd be getting if you heard me say that. Shut up. Gonna check out another tip back in the suburbs. Wish us luck. I was sitting by the fire at night with Lev, looking at the waves, thinking about you. I told him your stupid joke about the skateboarding grandma. He laughed so hard he spit out his food. It's the happiest I've seen him yet. I miss you. You'd have liked it here. There are no towns, just small caravans that move up and down the coast. Everyone says Santa Barbara is haunted, like some Bermuda Triangle. I think it's beautiful. I saw a seal the other day. It had spots. Is some kind of karmic way of you mocking me. Oh, wow. Yeah, so that tells me that Abby carries Owen as some form of attachment figure. And I think that was pretty evident throughout the game. I wouldn't say that changes anything about how I see their relationship. Is there any unanswered questions from either Last of Us games you wish you had an answer to? I want to know what the conversation was the morning after Owen and Abby slept together. I want to know that. That is the one moment, I think, of all of the games that I so badly wish I knew what that conversation was that morning before Abby decided to leave and go back for Lev. I'm worried the TV show won't convey as much emotion or mental health stuff the game itself showed, especially with the mainstream media's ability to downplay mental health. We'll find out. I have no idea. I would argue, though, that the game is not particularly heavy-handed with mental health stuff. I think it is because I was playing it, but I don't really think that there's a lot of overt representation of mental health issue beyond Abby being, or beyond Ellie being kind of like shaky about the violence she's causing. I think for the most part, the mental health stuff is left for the player to experience and project into.
I think a lot of it speaks to their performances, and like you're able to pull that. I know you have the knowledge of the just to convey those things into words, and honestly, that's I kind of answer your question, Shelbs, of where did it go? Sorry, did watching the playthrough change how I felt about the first game? And what about the second game changed for you this time around? So I guess you kind of putting into words a lot of these things that I feel like, because it makes sense what Joel is doing with Ellie, but for you, making it and giving it a term like caregiver. Like I never applied that playing the first time. I just knew like, oh, he's taking care of Ellie. Ellie matters to Joel, or Ellie matters to Joel. And so I think I mean, you added so much more depth to this in a way that it's like it kind of sits there subconsciously, but I don't know how to, like, when people ask me about it, even like right now, it's like, and I'd be like, you know what, why don't you just go check his TikTok, he talks, you know, that kind of thing, because you just convey it so beautifully where it's like, oh my god, it just clicks, it makes sense. So I think I got way more out of you doing it this way. And then the second time the game changed for you this time around, not a whole lot, honestly. I think it just kind of sticks with that too, where he just added so much more to this for me that I appreciate.
I'm glad.
And, yeah, dude, and I'm glad that we got to do this for everybody else too, because I do love the direction this stuff is going. It's interesting, and it's also cool that Willow is here and adding the insight that
man.
And it's, I don't know, I get kind of, I love like the behind the scenes stuff with a lot of this, and it's fascinating to kind of get that as we play the game. So I don't remember what we were first talking about.
Oh, it's all good. I'm curious, since your forte, so to speak, I think this might relate. Oh wait, were you reading Siora? Did you read Siora's yet? Okay, so do you agree with Sean? Do you agree with Ryan's take on experiencing the story? Wait, I'm curious. This is your forte, so to speak, is the more movie episodic games you've played. So do you agree with Ryan's take on experiencing the story this way? I think about your playthrough of Ghost and the arc of that game feeling maybe a bit more freeform while still being fairly well flowed. I'm curious where you are relative between the two games.
So are you referring to? Do you mean Siora like this is a linear story in that sense?
That's That's how I'm reading it. Is it different to where this is very like linear, episodic, directed, as opposed to like running around in a free world like a Grand Theft Auto or a Ghost or something where like you do a lot more stuff on your own pace.
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of hard to answer. I mean, I think it kind of comes down to similar to like watching a movie, which you could argue this kind of can be a movie at times.
Oh yeah.
Literally turning it into a TV show, but it's kind of just, I'm here to experience the story, and whatever that story is, I'm taking it for what it is. Like, and I can feel, you can't control how you feel, that's just, it is what it is. And so, with this particular game, I do feel like it flowed. Obviously it flowed, and it's, do I agree with this take on experiencing the story this way? I'm trying to think of, I mean, I don't know how else you would experience the story. It's just, it is what it is kind of thing. So I guess if you want to elaborate, Siora, I can try to answer that more eloquently, because I feel like I'm just...
You're good. Kitten Death, thank you for the 15 months. I could not be more thankful to be around in this community. I may not be as chatty anymore, but I lurk every night. I always enjoy listening to streams. I fall asleep. You're all amazing. Thank you, Kitten Death. I appreciate you, friend. I don't know if you read it, but there's a note to Mel you can find as Ellie in the room the deserters ambush at the workbench. They're former Fireflies that Mel was thinking of joining before and went missing. I know I missed some notes because, again, if there's anything that drives me nuts in these games, it's that like you have tension between, do I explore or do I push onward because this is time limited. So I know there are some aspects of the game world I didn't find, but I don't know if I read that note. I might have read it in the first time I played it, but not this one. I assumed Abby left before Owen woke up. That could be the case. The conversations when Ellie, Tawny, and Dina came back from Seattle. Yeah, I would love to have seen that too. Do you think there will be another game? I have no idea. You'd have to ask Naughty Dog that. Do you have a favorite moment in either Last of Us games that sticks out in your mind for both of us? I think the moment that stands out to me the most, where I felt like off the top of my head right now, where for me it was just so ridiculously rich with like a million things going on, is when Tommy shows up at Ellie and Dina's and tells Ellie where Abby is. That moment it's freaking bananas how many dynamics are going on in that moment. And I felt like I could probably spend an hour and a half just analyzing that specific moment. and what that is for every single person involved in that scene. Like, to me, as a family therapist, that moment is like why I do my job. So I think that of all the 2 games, I think that moment stands out to me the most in terms of its richness. What's your favorite part in both games?
I don't know. To call it a favorite part is weird. I don't know if I necessarily call it that, but I still think the most impactful scene for me is the whole Henry and Sam sequence, because of me having brothers, and I resonate very hard with that scene just because of my brothers. And so I think that scene is still so goddamn hard to watch.
Yeah.
In not like it's a, not obviously bad things happen in that scene, but like the scene impacts me. So I think that it's probably the Henry and Sam sequence, and it's kind of like where I was hoping Ellie was going to go save Abby. I'm sure I was like most people. I was like, oh my god, we've got Henry and Sam with us, and then they yank that rug right out from under you, and it's just that shit hurts. So
it does, man.
But it is what it is.
My favorite character in all of the games is Bill.
Ooh. Okay, so you mentioned wanting to know. I want to know what the fuck happened to Bill. I was hoping there'd be something in 2 of like, alluding to Bill and something. Because yes, I want to know what happened to Bill. Probably more.
I love Bill. I love every freaking aspect of Bill.
Yeah, the actor for Bill is incredible. He's told that character so fucking well. I loved it. Every second Bill was there, I loved it.
Yeah. They technically wrote a script for part 3, apparently, but it's not them confirming whether there will be an actual game. Interesting. The first game for me, it's either Sam or Henry's death or Ellie and Joel's conversation when she ran away. I cry more to that scene over Sarah's death. Makes sense. In the end, do you think Tommy cared about Ellie, or was he so consumed with revenge that Ellie was expendable to him? I don't think Ellie's expendable. I think Tommy realized that Ellie was quite literally the only person that would empathize with what he was asking her for. And I think Ellie refusing to do it, well, it's sort of fascinating because we never really get to see whether Tommy finds out that Ellie left. As far as we know, Tommy's still back in Jackson, pissed off at Dina for blocking Ellie from going. So Tommy's arc, I think Tommy's arc is very similar to Ellie's, in the sense that Tommy never says thank you to Joel. And I think Tommy realizes that when it's too late, that he really is alive to do all the things that he did because Joel took care of him. Like, the 2 people in this world that want to thank Joel for all the brutal shit he was willing to do in order to keep them alive were in the room with Joel when he died without the opportunity to say it to him. And I think that eats Tommy up the same way that it eats Ellie up. And Tommy had even more history. Tommy was there for all of it. So, I mean, Tommy saw Sarah die. Tommy knows that Joel thinks that Ellie also died. I think that Tommy, it's like I said in the movie, or in the video, right? Like, Ellie, at the very least, makes some attempt to invite Dina in. I think Tommy pushes everyone away. So, Tommy, which is why I think that moment is just so ridiculously rich with dynamics. After something like this, how can humans recover society? No idea. It would take a long ass time.
Take a very long time.
Ellie does mention Bill in a little line about rigging up an entire town, but nothing more. Yeah, that's all I remember hearing too.
Yeah.
The brutal struggle Tommy had to go through to change from going out to Seattle to save Ellie after trying to talk her out of going to her. You know what, Shelbs? You saying that reminds me. I think that Tommy, without acknowledging it, is pissed that Ellie didn't kill Abby. Because Tommy did to Maria what Ellie did to Dina. Right? Like, Tommy basically said, we got to do this. And he left Maria behind and he went to go do it. And he came back empty-handed. And I think Tommy, in some ways, wants that job finished because he gave up his entire life stability for that. Which is why I think if Tommy found out that Ellie spared Abby in Santa Barbara, I think he'd be pissed. I don't think Tommy would look at that as being redemptive for Ellie at all. I think he would be livid at her. Because it's an unfinished job that he was willing to give up. Like, Tommy never really saw himself as a caretaker to Ellie. I think Tommy sees himself as trying to differentiate himself as a person who was taken care of by Joel for 20 years by being self-sufficient. I mean, Tommy's a loner through and through. Tommy goes to Seattle by himself. Right? Like, Tommy doesn't travel in packs. So Tommy is desperately not wanting to be taken care of. I'm guessing that also being disabled in the way that he is rubs up against that because now Tommy has to be taken care of in some way. And I don't think Tommy wants to ask for that because it brings up a bunch of shit about his lack of autonomy or his need to be taken care of by Joel growing up, which goes against what a lot of people, particularly men, I think, have this sense that they want to be self-sufficient in these like very like masculine ways, and Tommy probably sees that as emasculating, and he's playing all that shit out in these moments. You dive a bit more into what makes Bill your favorite character. Bill, I think, of every character we come across, I think Bill is the most matter-of-fact and grounded about the context he's in. And he is unapologetic about it. I also think that Bill is just, he comes off to me as maybe the most authentic person in this entire series. He's just unabashedly who he is. He is unapologetic about the conclusions he's come to about survival. He has set up that town in probably the best possible way a person could set up that town. And he's got his own system going. And Bill was able to appreciate what it takes to survive that world and made his peace with it. And I have a lot of respect for that. And I think he's hilarious.
It's just entertaining.
It's just entertaining, man.
Time.
Yeah. I'd want to hang out with him. He probably wouldn't want to hang out with me, but I'd want to hang out with him. Would you find it funny that the level Ellie mentions Bill was one of my other levels? That's awesome. Tommy, like Ellie, lost everything, but Tommy's gonna be Tommy is gonna be forgiven over Ellie, in my opinion. I don't know, man. He alludes to the fact that him and Maria are separated, but it also could be that his decision. I mean, Tommy constantly makes decisions at the behest of Maria. Like, he constantly just basically says, like, all right, just this last time, Maria, and she probably got sick of it. Again, the same way that Dina got sick of Ellie. I'm sure you've said on previous streams, but what game is next for you? Detroit Become Human.
It makes me think too. They'd have to be relatively, because I don't think they explicitly really say where the farm is at that Dina and her are at. So I mean, considering that Tommy, he's missing his eye and his leg is all messed up and stuff. I would imagine he can't be that far.
Yeah.
Like, he's not going to be wandering around. He's not going from Jackson to Seattle again or anything by any means. So they have to be relatively close to.
Plus, Ellie and Dina have to be able to get like groceries and resources and stuff from Jackson. Like, there has to be a supply line there. I can't imagine that they're doing 2-day trips to get that stuff, right?
No. But I guess I also don't know what they would really need outside. I mean, yeah, I guess that's a good point too. I mean, they are on a farm, so I would imagine that they would be a little bit self-sustaining to some degree. I have no idea, but
Maria was well within her right to dump Tommy. I agree. They say the farm is too far for Jesse's older parents, but still less than a day trip. Okay, cool. I love that they left the ending open to interpretation. I've heard rumors of how the ending was changed and the discussion of narrative items in the scene. Yeah, and ultimately we got what we got, right?
It's such a hard decision to make. Like, I don't even know how you would I'd be curious to know like how many endings they had planned. The discussion, like a writer's room, would be fascinating.
Yeah, it would.
To sit in, especially for something like this.
Yeah.
And in the concept of a video game, because you have to incorporate the gaming aspect into the story, and there's just so much stuff that goes into it that we just take for granted because we're just, you know.
Yeah.
I turn on the system and I just consume the media, you know.
And that's it. No, I think it's neat. Yeah, like I heard another Last of Us 2 stream I was on today that they were originally going to have a day 4 and 5 for Seattle. Boy, that would be such a long game.
Yes, this game was incredible how quickly you got through one, and then
8 and 11 parts respectively. I'm surprised I got through Last of Us 2 and 11. I thought it was going to be 16 to 20.
Yeah. And you didn't do a 7-hour Mass Effect stream, or Last of Us like you did with Mass Effect.
Do you think that if either Abby and or Ellie had a therapist to talk to during their arc, would their trajectory change? I have a hard time saying no, but I also have a hard time saying yes. Like, I don't think, and I truly mean this, I don't think either one of them would have sought a therapist. Therapists, to some extent, are luxury items. And I don't think that in that world, a therapist is going to do either of them any good. You have to want to go to therapy. Like, you have to want that stuff to change. I could maybe see Ellie going to a therapist maybe when she's living with Dina by Dina's request. And I think that's maybe the only place in the entire game where I would say that a therapist would be a good available option. But I don't think either one of them would pursue it.
I think we talked about it 1,000 times too. The sensibilities of this world, they're completely different in their world. They're surviving.
Yep.
I would be surprised if they're sitting there worrying or thinking that. They're probably worrying, but even having time to really contemplate, like, you know what? There's a therapist right here. Let me go. I don't even know. It'd be interesting, but
yeah, I just don't know. I also just don't know how at that point in the timeline, I don't even know that there would be a therapist, right? Like, I don't know that there would be somebody still around who specializes in working people through trauma. Like, you might have somebody who's a good listener or whatnot, but I don't think that's a world that a therapist can exists in. Do you think how Tommy acted as an adult was based off Joel, seeing how Joel raised him? Almost certainly some aspects of it, yes. Tommy was taken down by Abby and even shot in the back. Probably thought he sacrificed himself so that Ellie could get the drop on Ellie. Or could get the drop on Abby. Ellie not using the opportunity must have felt like a betrayal to him. Potentially. But I think maybe he would even go one further to conceptualize that as a betrayal to Joel. Like, I think letting Abby live... If that's why I say I think if Tommy found out that Ellie let Abby live, he would see that as a betrayal to Joel and by extension to himself. Tommy's relationship with Maria reminded me a lot of Joel's relationship with Tess, though we didn't see much of Joel or Tess. Yeah, yes and no. Joel and Tess seemed to have like a shared purpose and conviction. Maria very much seems to be invested in what Tommy says he's invested in, but isn't actually invested in, if that makes sense. Why they put a permadeath mode in this game is story driven, doesn't really lend itself to a permadeath run. I think just to give people a challenge. You don't have to play permadeath, so I think it's just it adds replayability for people who want to give it a try. In some ways, I think it would be fun because it would absolutely jack the intensity up, but
it'd be so tense.
It'd be super tense. Like, if you imagine getting all the way to like Abby Seattle day 3 and you die because one of the dogs gets loose and you miss your shot with the one bullet you have left. Like, that would just, I mean, you want to talk about a cold kick in the nuts. Oh,
I would
man. Or you
mean,
fall
for
off the
controllers,
bridge. Fuck.
That would be.
It's too
I'd be
stressful
throwing
for
my
me.
controller.
Could you see a therapist becoming a soldier or attached to a unit in the Last of Us world? Sure. Yeah.
I feel like you have no choice, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Me being a therapist suddenly doesn't matter if that cordyceps virus was real life. Like, what am I going to do? Ask people how they feel about it? Everybody's trying to survive. So, yeah, man, I think if people are going to do whatever they got to do to survive. What about, so, like, chat, what about you guys? Is there anything that, like, stood out to you in the game? Is there anything that, like, if you had played the game before, is there any, I would be curious to know if you all are willing to share with me, if there are ways in which my run of the game changed how you saw the game, particularly if you played it before. I'm interested in people who saw it blind as well, like the impact it had, but similar to Mass Effect, the feedback about like the way in which how I play these games influences you guys is very interesting to me, because it helps me know what stands out to you and what's meaningful. So like, I'd be curious if there were things where you're like, man, yeah, I didn't notice that the first time, or like this changed my perception. And even if it made it worse, like if you're like, nah, I freaking hate this game now because of how you described it, like I'd still be curious to hear about that. I've never seen any media describe and show PTSD so well. I would agree with that. I think it's pretty well represented in the game. I hear people love Survivor difficulty for the challenge. The permadeath mode got added later. Yeah, I loved playing Last of Us 1 on Grounded. I think Maria is all about survival wellness of the whole group. I would agree with that. Not necessarily about you playing, but after going through the story again, it hits extremely different after living through a pandemic. Yeah, yeah, it really does. I think the part of it that influences me the most is it makes it a little bit easier for me to side with Joel when he's running through the hospital, because if we can't even get people to wear fucking masks and take an immunization that actually legitimately exists and a year later is shown to be fine, I don't know how you get people to take that vaccine. Like that would play in my mind. I'd be like, man, people aren't even willing to take free COVID vaccines. Why on earth are they really going to take this one? Like, it would instill enough doubt in my mind that I could get a little bit more on board with Joel. Like, I mean, because to me, it seemed so, like, obvious, like, the second time I played it, I was like, Jesus Christ, like, yeah, of course you want a vaccine. Wouldn't everybody want one? And I think about that now. Wouldn't everybody want one? And it's like, no. And I'm like, what? So I'm not going to go on a diatribe about COVID vaccine, but, like, I will say that playing this game at well, we're still in the pandemic absolutely influences some of the decisions I see.
That's in tomorrow's TikTok. So if you're curious what other people think, you can probably tune into those comments and we can all find out together. So
I'd never seen any gameplay, but had heard about the big spoiler of Joel's death, so I was kind of leery of the game initially and heard it was pretty sad. I'm glad I got to experience here with the community. I'm glad you did too. Your playthrough helped me see PTSD from a different perspective. I have it myself, but it looks different than it looks in the game, so it helped me see other sides of it. I'm glad to hear that. I liked the game when it came out. I like it more now. Awesome. Played it for the first time in the summer twice, much like you. Second playthrough helps the perspective. My opinion on the game didn't change because honestly, what you've been saying is essentially what I feel. Awesome. I appreciate the story of the game more having had this commentary from a mental health expert, but it doesn't change my opinion of the game itself from meh because the commentary from Dr. Mick isn't part of the game itself. That's fair. Personally, I don't like the bleakness of the world in The Last of Us. Nothing will ever change that, but that's just a personal thing. How I view the real world, you know? Disclaimer, the worldview does not affect my enjoyment of the game. I often put that aside. That's fair. Like I say, I totally understand people not liking this game from that standpoint. The game is hard to describe as fun. Like, it's not... Like, I'm not sitting here, like, the way I feel when Destiny's clicking on all cylinders, where, like, I just so badly want to play it because it's just super enjoyable. Like, it's enjoyable for a different reason. So I completely understand if people don't like the violence and the death and the bleakness and all that shit. I don't know. 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 I don't know firmly believe that I would have hated Abby. I don't think that I would have been able to pull back from my own feelings long enough to understand her. I think it would have overall negatively impacted my view of the game too if I didn't experience it here first. That makes sense. The big takeaway from watching media about the world of The Last of Us is that a fungal infestation can't really be treated with a vaccine, so it's my one plot hole of the entire series. Yeah, and I don't know if you were here in the beginning, Willow, when I said this, but I certainly understand that and respect that. At the same time, like, I think I'm borrowing a little bit of Sean's language from the other night, because Sean said this. He's like, you can take some liberties here, I think. Like, if we're able to create a picture where, like, people survive cordyceps infection, I think we might be able to say, like, whether it's a vaccine or whether it's a freaking cream or a suppository, whatever the hell he would have developed, like, we could have some plausibility that there was a potential cure. Like, I think if you go into this game and you say with under no uncertain terms, there's no cure, then I think it changes the entire complexity of the game, right? Because then there's really no point to even taking Ellie in the first place. There are people out there that when they see the molecular makeup of an apple, will say they don't want. They say they don't want any of those chemicals in their body. I know, crazy. My first playthrough, I found that both the length of the game and the hyperviolence off-putting left me feeling really frustrated, but being able to watch and look at it in certain parts made it a more enjoyable experience. I think the game is great, but I don't think the story needs to be an interactive medium. I kind of agree with that. I mean, like I say, I very much think there's gratuitous violence. Good night, Victoria. Gasoline wouldn't work 25 years later. We can suspend reality a little bit. Right, that's a great point. We've never made a vaccine for a killer fungus because we've never needed to. That's also a good point. Look forward to your takes on the PTSD representation since I just got here a few minutes ago. Well, if you are here for the first time, the entire playthrough of The Last of Us 2 is available on YouTube. Isn't the last part going up tomorrow?
Yep.
Yeah, so as of tomorrow, the entire playthrough is going to be on YouTube. So if you want to catch up on VODs and see that, you can certainly watch it. I'm curious how you felt going from a game like Mass Effect, where you get to make your own choices and choose how you do and what you think, to Last of Us, where you're along for the ride and the decision the characters make is sort of their own decision. It's a different vibe for me. I like both in their own way. I think actually it's a little bit trickier for me to play games where there are decisions presented that I have to choose, because the game is not always going to present me with the decision that I would want to make relative to what I've seen. So that makes it a little bit complicated sometimes. Also because the way that the way Shepard would react sometimes when I made a decision was not how I wanted him to react, which I know is a critique of the series in general. These games that are a little bit more linear in nature, I think, provide an opportunity for me to really say, here is an example of this from like a more of a professional-ish standpoint. But at the same time, you get to hear me think through how I would interface with a certain thing when I play a game like The Last of Us. So or like Mass Effect. So I think they both have their own merit and utility, and I enjoy both. I've said it before, but how the game is built, both story-wise and world-building, just builds so much immersion. It's a complete blind perspective. I love this entire series. I probably like it more because of the commentary, but it just offers so much realism and many different ideas, problems for each person to have to face. It just offers so much insight. Totally agreed, Green Child. Totally agree. I think the biggest thing I'm hit with after you played through it is from this stream. After studying art and animation and writing games and movies, all I had a conscious note of someone intentionally wrote it this way rather than taking the story for what it is. I can understand that. Do you think humanity is headed toward extinction now that a vaccine is probably impossible? Are you talking about in The Last of Us or in real life? I don't know.
In the game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Life finds a way. Thoroughly enjoyed the playthrough and your commentary. Hats off to Naughty Dog in the moments that we all just paused to take in how beautiful moments were. Attention to details like shaking a snow globe, right? Watching you play this game has had me thinking about the things I take for granted in our modern world. It's been very eye-opening to what I value, and I've been reevaluating my life. Wow. There's some choice in linear games like this. You can choose to kill as many or as few as you like, but the larger story choices, you're along for the ride. Exactly. I prefer a game that isn't on rails. However, games that give decisions, sometimes the prompt ends up being something completely different than I expected. Agreed, Panda. The Apple comparison for the vaccine reminds me of the dihydrogen monoxide parody. Yep. Absolutely. Well, I will say that I said this a couple times during the playthrough, but I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to stream this. I remember way back when the game came out, I remember, Sean, you and I having a conversation about whether I would ever stream this because of how just like violent and extreme it is. And I will say, chat, this Last of Us 2 was absolutely the most violent and dark game that we're going to play. Like, Detroit is nothing in comparison to The Last of Us 2 as it relates to like gore and death and despair. Right, like there are some serious moments in the game, but it's just not going to hit the way that this game did. So we get a breath of fresh air here for a while with a lot of the games we're going to play coming up. Captain Dingus, I freaking love that name. Ellie saying my life would have mattered. She's essentially would have become a martyr. Martyrdom being a huge theme within this game for the Seraphites. We saw how that was corrupted. When you mentioned how even a vaccine, as evidenced by our current world, wouldn't be a magic bullet, they really resonated. She still could have died for nothing, right? And then it's on her. Ellie had meaning made for her life. Her purpose and why she's here was drilled into her. And then when that was taken away by Joel, she was left to have to construct it herself. And she didn't really have people around her that were reliable enough to help her do that in a meaningful way. Are there any characters in the Last of Us series who you identify with?
Oh, man. I have no idea. That's hard to say because I think we talk about it a lot where the circumstances are completely different. So it's... I have no idea. It's not a...
I would
personally,
say,
anyway.
I would say for me, and it's funny I'm saying this because of it being my favorite character, but there is a part of me that resonates with Bill. Because I could absolutely see myself being a guy who holed myself in and trapped the shit out of every perimeter leading up to me and just stayed by myself and like was a real pain in the ass when people that I cared about came around. Like I could see that happening, but I mean, yeah, I like Sean just said, I don't know that any of us really know who we would resonate with because it's such a different world. I think part of why I like Bill is because I value that he's able to maintain some level of authenticity throughout all of that. Have you ever played 2018 God of War? I feel like there's some really interesting psychological concepts to talk about on that one. So it's so interesting to me that you say that, Willow. God of War is probably the most requested game. I would say it's probably surpassed Dragon Age at this point. I get requested to play God of War all the time. My stance on God of War up until this point has basically been, I've played it, and I actually don't think there's as much content in that game that would be interesting to hear me talk about as people think. Me and Sean talked about this extensively last night. Like, God of War appears as if it's a game that has a significant amount of depth because there's this father-son relationship between Kratos and Boy, but it's like there are moments in that game that I could make content with, but I really think the majority of that game would be people watching me play the game rather than me having anything interesting to say about it, because the development of those characters I think is devoid of a lot of the context that we get in some of these other games. So I think there would be parts of the game that would be cool and I could make content with, but I don't know that there's enough there for that game for me to like dedicate an entire run to it, given some of the other games that are there. It's fascinating to me how often that game gets requested. Don't want to make it completely about myself, but no matter how bad my life or the world gets, I always hold on to a little bit of hope. There's nothing but pain and anguish in the world of The Last of Us. Game goes against every value I have, but that's what's great about any story in any medium. I don't mind having my worldview challenged. It's uncomfortable, and man, the game series is uncomfortable to watch. was okay with my worldview being challenged like it was. No, that's cool. I appreciate that, Taco. Are there any characters in the series you would say are irredeemable? No. Absolutely not. I think as soon as anybody sees a person as irredeemable, particularly if you're in a profession like mine, I don't know that you can. I don't think you can be a therapist and see people as irredeemable. I think you can see people as not ready for whatever it is that they may, need or want to have a fulfilling life. But to call a person irredeemable, I think is ridiculous. Dauntless, thank you for the raid, man. Appreciate it so much. Thanks for bringing folks my way. I hope you had a wonderful stream. For those who don't know, I am affiliated with Dauntless Snacks. Absolutely wonderfully delicious meat sticks that I promise you will like. I don't pair with people very often, but Jay is a veteran. He works his ass off. He knows what he's doing. He cares deeply about the product that he has. If you go to the link, you want to try out some Dauntless Snacks, you go to the link that's in the chat. Use UMatter as your promo code. Get yourself a little discount. Support the stream. Support my man Jay. It's good stuff. The symbiotic relationship between he and I. I love that Joel tells Ellie that if he had a second chance, he'd do it all over again. Yes! Shelbs, thank you for mentioning that. I didn't say anything about it in the playthrough. I respect the shit out of Joel for that. And I think the reason that Ellie says that she would like to forgive Joel is because he says that. Not because of the sentiment he expresses, but because that's the first time, aside from when she pried it out of him, that Joel tells her the truth and doesn't worry about the impact it will have on her. That Joel is willing to take accountability for his own perspective instead of trying to take care of her by lying to her. I really think had Joel lied to her there and said to her, you know what? Fine. If I could go back and do it again, I'd let you die. She knows that's not true. And so when Joel says to her, I'd do it again, I think even though she may not agree with it, she can respect it. Because now he's being honest with me. Even though it's not what I want to hear. He has relinquished a little bit of that desire to make sure that I'm pacified.
I'm reading chat, and I love that you called him boy instead of Atreus.
Yep.
Boy.
Boy.
Also, seeing that you're working on the sequel for God of War is awesome to hear.
Oh, that's badass.
Outrageously excited for that.
I wish Hellblade could be done in this format, but I remember you mentioning you don't think it's possible. I played Hellblade already on stream, and I really don't. In part because Senua's experience is not something that I have a ton of expertise in, because we're starting to get into things like pretty severe psychosis, and that's not my arena. The game was great. I enjoyed the game, but I don't know that I'd play it again. I think people throw around irredeemable too much these days. Yeah, I'd agree. I can overlook the fungus vaccine plot hole. My problem with it is strategic. If you have one living sample of immunity, you don't risk it all on a single high-risk surgery after only one single set of tests, and that knee-jerk reaction is completely out of character with the man that Abby knew. I think that's fair. I wish we could see more context and lead up to that. Like, I would love to see, like, the Firefly aspect of that and building that up so that we could see that maybe that was, like, an actual good culmination. Also, everything we saw of the remnants of the Fireflies afterward tells me they could not be trusted with control, only the cure. It would have been just another way of imposing will on their others. I agree with that as well. I can't remember if we discussed this in the game or not, but can you explain more why Ellie was mad at Joel and not so much Seth when Joel intervenes? That was one of the few moments where even I felt heated and wanted to punch Seth for what he said. Yeah, so I think Ellie is also angry at Sam. Or at Seth, but Joel stepping in there, he does that at a time where him and Ellie are on thin ice. And I think Ellie needs Joel to see her as capable of managing her own affairs. So Joel is, I mean, we see context for that, right? Like we hear Jesse say to her, Joel rides my ass when you're involved in patrols. Like Joel's trying to exert caregiver influence on Ellie passively because she's cut him off to an extent. So in that moment, Joel steps in and he goes at Seth, and I think it creates a dissonant experience for Ellie, because on one hand, I think she's glad that Joel is willing to stand up for her, but also seeing Joel stand up for her as a caregiver draws her closer to him because that's the nature of their relationship, but she doesn't want to be close to him because she's angry at him, and she also wants to be able to show that she can handle her own affairs. So it creates a lot of dissonance, and Joel becomes the target there, because I think Ellie can look and go, yeah, okay, so Seth is a bigot and we hate that, but also like, fuck him. But Joel comes in and that carries meaning for her. That's why I think she's more angry at Joel than she is Seth there. Would you consider playing Silent Hill 2? Probably not. I'm just being honest. I just finished watching the last VOD for 2, and it was amazing seeing the story for the first time with you talking through it. It was an awesome experience. I'm so glad to hear that. I also resonated with your mention of Ellie possibly going after Abby as kind of a suicide mission. Ellie could have left her on the post and known she's dead. She could have killed Abby while she was tied to the post. There were so many options, but I think Ellie sort of thought, if Abby dies, that's what I want. So cool, I guess. But if Abby kills me, that wouldn't be so terrible either. Yep.
It's interesting.
Yep. Yeah, I remember feeling that way even in the first time I played it. I was like, oh man, Ellie's doing this because if Ellie dies, then fine. You know, like I really think that she would have been okay if Abby killed her. Do you think Joel hindered Ellie's ability to have relationships with other people? No. I actually think Joel is the template through which Ellie realizes she can have relationships with other people. I think Joel is the one that struggles with Ellie having relationships with others more than Ellie. Think about that like for parents, right? Like when your kids get old enough that they have some autonomy to go hang out with friends and they want to be with their friends more often than they're with you, they probably engage more effectively with friends because you laid a template through which they were able to realize that relationships are possible. So Ellie's ability to engage with somebody like Dina and Jesse, I don't think she would have been able to have those meaningful relationships if Joel hadn't shown her what he showed her. Like that's kind of how attachment works. It's kind of how caregiving works as well in terms of socialization. This was fun. See you next stream. This discussion added so much more to how I felt about 1 and 2. I like the games, but never really found a safe place to discuss them since there's such strong feelings elsewhere online. Felt the same way during the Mass Effect discussion stream. This is a great environment. Detroit Become Human will be completely blind for me. Good night. Oh man, that's gonna be fun.
You're gonna enjoy that one, Taco.
Yep. Absolutely. I love all of your thoughts, by the way. This is going well. I am happy with how these conversations are going.
Are you talking to me?
Oh, you and Chad. I mean, like, this is... everywhere you go to talk about The Last of Us 2, it turns into a freaking shit show. Like, my TikTok comments on Last of Us 1 content are awful in terms of talking about 2. It's crazy. People go out of their way to shit on the game. Like, it's wild to me. I have never hated something so much that I wanted other people to hate it too. Like, besides, like, serious things. Like, I hate racism. I want other people to hate racism too. But, like, this is a freaking video game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I need to talk to you about a pay raise with the amount of moderating I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to pay me by the moderated comment.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Holy shit, dude. 1,643 moderated comments at $1 a comment? Oh my god. The haters call. Again, I respect people not liking the game. I really do. But when I don't go out of my way to try to convince people that hate the game that it's good. Well, the story sucked and was a 180 from the first game. See, that's the kind of comment that's just not constructive or useful. So, goodbye. That's what I'm talking about. That kind of shit just doesn't add anything. I can definitely agree with that sentiment about this being a productive and caring environment. I've definitely been harassed by someone for commenting that I liked a well-written essay on how the game was affected them in a positive way. Yeah, I mean, it's just fine. If you don't like it, cool. If you like it, cool. Like, that's great. I don't like people trying to convince other people to get on their side with it. Who cares? Like, the other thing that I always think about is like, okay, so I'm going to go into TikTok comments if I'm a person, and there's this person that loves The Last of Us 2, and I'm going to convince them that the game sucks. Like, let's say even if you do that, then what? Like, what did you actually accomplish? You've converted one person to a meaningless thing that there are still hundreds of thousands of other people that are in that camp. I just don't understand it. Like, what a waste of time. And that's what I mean. It's like, it's people acting on their entitlement. What are you looking to add then? Because I was just sharing an opinion. Well, I'm looking for more constructive stuff. I've never seen your name before, Winston. So, like, if you, like, we have kind of a rule here around this that, like, if people just come in and go, The Last of Us 2 sucks, it's not like it doesn't add anything. Like, it's just, there's no constructiveness to it. The amount of salty comments you get on TikTok and others, imagine playing a game on stream when it first came out. Yeah, well, this community's great, so I don't think it would have been a problem. Last of Us 2 leaves a bad taste in my mouth, not because of the game, but because of the hate culture around it, where the voice actor of Abby had death threats thrown at her because of what the character she voiced did. Yeah, I know. It's like people getting mad at the weatherman for saying what's going to, like, for a tornado showing up. I remember Scott talking about that all the time.
Oh, dude. Yeah.
We have a friend who's a weatherman, and, like, people get shitty with weathermen. It's like, look, I'm just telling you what's going to happen.
We, one time we had severe weather when I worked at the station, sidetrack from The Last of Us here, but we were literally rotations like in the sky. We had to be on the air during Wheel and Jeopardy, and most of the people that would watch our station are older people. That is their time. And so we were getting calls of people being pissed that we were interrupting Wheel and Jeopardy when there are actual rotations like happening in the sky. And we are warning people like, hey, there are tornadoes. They were, oh my God. So mad. So, yeah.
How dare you tell me a tornado's going to hit my house when I've got Jeopardy to watch?
I know.
Oh, God. Have you played Death Stranding? And if so, do you think that game would work for the content you make? I have played Death Stranding. There are a lot of folks here that are here because of my Death Stranding run. And no, I don't. Death Stranding was a really fun experience, but that game was good for me being able to interact with chat while I played it. It was not a game that was good for this kind of format. I love that game. But no, I don't think it works for this. When I made posts on Twitter about my mother, how she passed before I could play the sequel for her since she was a Last of Us fan, and some people hated Last of Us 2 so much they started insulting my mother. Jesus Christ. That it was good she passed before seeing that trash. Oh my God.
Fucking God.
Fucking hell, man. What do you mean when you say don't ask questions you don't want the answer to? Like Ellie asking Joel about what happened at the hospital. So there's a concept that I talk about a lot when I do therapy with folks, particularly relationship therapy, where if you are going to ask a person a question that you know has the potential to have an answer that's going to upset you, it's your responsibility to manage the way in which you handle your emotional experience for that answer. And a lot of times people will ask questions without preparing themselves for the truth. And what you do is if you freak out on a person for telling you the truth, you have punished that person for telling you the truth. So what I tell people all the time is if you want an honest answer from somebody for a question you have, do not ask that question until you are ready to respond in a thoughtful way that rewards the person for disclosing the truth. because if otherwise you can extinguish a good behavior, where if a person asks a question, you don't want a person around you to say, oh my God, I don't know if I want to answer that, because if I tell the truth, they're going to flip their shit. Like, it's okay if you get angry, but you have to be mindful of that type of thing as a relational endeavor, right? So if Ellie is going to ask Joel as an adult, did you lie to me? Ellie has to be ready for the answer that says yes. It doesn't mean she can't be mad about it. It doesn't mean she can't set boundaries. But it does mean that it's not in her interest to punish Joel for answering honestly. Because otherwise that's going to reinforce for him, don't ever say the thing that's going to upset somebody, that's going to upset her, because she's just going to freak out. And so, like, I really think that that's an important thing for every single person to integrate into their lives. We actually, anytime that I work with couples that have had an affair happen, I have to have this conversation with them of like, if you're going to ask questions, so if you want the relationship to work and your partner had an affair, if you're going to ask questions, do not ask any questions about the affair that person had unless you're ready for an honest answer, because I'm going to facilitate that person answering your questions honestly. So do not ask, what was she wearing? Or what positions were you in? How many times? Don't ask those questions unless you want an honest answer. And unless you feel like you can handle the answer. Because if that person has to lie in order to like keep you engaged, you're doing yourself latent disservice. It's a very difficult position for people to be in, but that's how you facilitate trust and connection. Which is why it's so impressive that Joel told the truth to her again at the end of the story, and why they could finally start processing. It's exactly my point. Joel saying I would do it again is the best thing he could have ever said. Because that has the potential to hurt Ellie. And Ellie needs to know that Joel is okay with hurting her if it means telling the truth. Are there any movies you've seen that would show good examples of mental issues? I don't watch a lot of movies, so I'm not a really good person to ask about that, Cassandra, unfortunately. I mean, Sean, you're willing to answer if you'd like, but anytime Jared and I get this question, we usually say, no, not really.
You two would be the experts, so I honestly don't know. I mean, I would have to think about movies that I would want you to watch and see and be like, how is this? But
I'm sure they're out there. I just don't watch enough movies to know them.
Yeah.
I play a lot of video games, right? Like The Last of Us to me would be like an example of a movie that I would say is a great representation of certain things. I'm curious what prompted Ellie to go back to the hospital alive 4 years later. I feel like that would make more sense to do it sooner unless there was something that happened to bring it all back up. Well, I don't know that I think Ellie needed that lie for a while. And then I think when Ellie became a little bit more self-sufficient, was looking for a level of self-actualization, was building her identity, I think it became increasingly important for her. Because that lie was no longer protective. Is there a term or phrase for that when somebody asks a question they already know is going to upset them just so they have a reason to be mad? Self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess. Maybe even manipulation. I have a genuine question in regard to the negative reactions. What do you think causes somebody to become so dedicated to being toxic about the game? It almost feels like the same kind of fixation that Ellie herself goes through. I have to deal with one in real life, so better understanding why they act like that might help to move on. Oh, there's a lot of reasons why this happens. When people create a schema for something, it becomes a guiding principle because it takes the ambiguity out of things. So if we look at love and hate of like a game in this example as being a black and white mentality, it's easier. It's easier for a person to say, I love the game. It's easier for a person to say, I hate the game, because it creates a very simple set of expectations. It gets us away from dissonance. If a person says, there are aspects of the game that I like, there are aspects of the game that I do not like, you are having to hold some conflicting ideas. And people do not have, on the whole, as high of an amount of distress tolerance anymore as they used to. And there's a lot of reasons for that I won't go into. But like, when a person decides that they hate the game, anybody who presents information that goes against that becomes a threat, because they create dissonance in that person's mind. And so a person is going to double down, even in the presence of like factual data that would support the opposite claim. It's also called the backfire effect. You can read about that if you like. But it polarizes people into a position because they also try to save face. We also kind of live in an environment right now where if people change their opinions on things, they get punished for it. They're seen as a flip-flopper or somebody who doesn't stick to their guns. And so that facilitates an energy where it's vulnerable to change your mind. Or it's vulnerable that there's a chance that your initial reaction to something was either incorrect or was not actually what it is. And Sean just linked that in the chat, so thanks for doing that. But like, people double down rather than move into a cognitive gray space of dissonance. And it's an unfortunate reality right now that we see kind of transcending a lot of context. You see it on sports television all the time. You see it in politics. You see it all over the place. Social media is a great place for that too, because people do experience a level of physiological arousal from hate as much as they do from like love. And some people build an identity off of what they aren't instead of off of what they are. So there's a lot of layers to it. Seemed like once the stability kind of surfaced with them and Jackson, it gave her room to start asking questions. So it makes sense to me why she took her time to get to that point. Yeah, survival was no longer the major directive. This game's great, man. In terms of what it facilitates.
I'll say it again with chat that I was excited to see you do it, play this, and with the direction the stream's been going, because there is a lot to break down. There's so much more into this than I think a lot of us can, take at the surface. And hearing you break it down in this way is fascinating to me, and I know it's fascinating to everybody else. So I guess this is me throwing you a big fucking kiss because you deserve it for
thanks, buddy.
Sherping us through these very dark games. They're important games, and I think it provides us opportunities to have these discussions, and I value it.
I'm glad, and I appreciate that you have been able to help me get it out to, because I mean, seriously, like, y'all, I cannot understate that, like, the interest in growth and accessibility of this channel is because of Sean. Like, TikTok has brought an astounding amount of people over to this stream. Like, I mean, it is absolutely nutty. Like, in the last 28 days, we've gotten 1,347 more subscriptions on YouTube. Like, we're almost at 3,700 subs on YouTube, which is absolutely bananas. Like, it's crazy to me how much, and it was completely Sean's idea to put me on TikTok. Like, me and Jared were like, and Sean's like, no, we're doing TikTok, and it was brilliant. So I'm glad that I can bring content, and then Sean takes that content and like makes it content, if that makes sense. So I'm grateful to have your assistance with it too, man, because I would never be able to do all this by myself. Like, no way. There'd still probably be like 40 of you here.
It's my absolute honor, pleasure, and it makes me happy seeing people say that they came from
Oh yeah.
TikTok and are here and contribute and keep this place. It's hard work to keep this a meaningful, and it's not that difficult because you all are great, but you make it easy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
Well, that's good to hear, because I can be a pain in the ass. I think I'm more of a pain in the ass to Jared than I am to you, but Jared serves as like my manager, and I'm not easy to manage. BFKs to Jared.
yeah.
I love you, buddy. Thank you for the 100 bits. Last of Chuck. Floaty, thanks for gifting that sub to Sith Pan. God damn it, you guys are like 2-0 tonight. Not Willie, thank you for the sub. The Last of Us is a game that changed my life, and 2 is one that changed my mind. Thanks for helping me think about them in a new and wonderful way, and thank you so much to Sean, because without you, I'd have never found this community. Yeah, man. It's good stuff. Well, like I always say, like, you know, those of you that like sub and stuff, your financial support of the stream helps me compensate Sean for the hard work that he does. Sean doesn't do this. I could never expect you to do everything you do for free at this point. So like,
I wish I could, because I would.
No, I know, but like,
stuff.
Jesus Christ, I'd feel terrible if you did this for free. So like, but it's, I mean, to get maybe a little mushy for a second, like what's really cool is, in a lot of ways, like this stream has kind of like created a chance for me to like for basically for like me and my best friends to like go into business together. Like you get to use your skills as like a video editor and stuff, and like your eye for that, and like literally what you went to school for, and like, you know, I get to kind of be like the front facing personality of it, and like, you know, do the mental health thing I'm doing, and like, you know, and Jared is like touches like all parts of it, and like it feels like this little sphere where like we're able to like actually make like a living to it. I mean, for you especially, like make a living doing this stuff. And that's really cool, because like I remember times like in high school, like we'd like joke around about like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we all could like work together? You know, and like this is actually a space where we can do that. So it's really, really neat for us, and for me, I'll speak for me behind the scenes, that like I get to like do business like with my friends, and we get to have fun doing it, and we take it seriously, but it's also fun. And like I don't know, like we all work really hard in our own ways to try to make this happen. So I'm really grateful for that.
I am too. Obviously, I am too, because
got your ass out of that news station, man.
that was big. That was very big, yes. But I like doing this stuff, and I'm glad that it makes an impact on people, and I can help spread the stuff that you are trying to let people know about. And this format is interesting because so many of us play video games. Yeah. And I think it gives us, I mean, I feel like you've talked about it before, where there's extra depth, and there's more to it than just like I'm sitting on the couch and I'm just shooting stuff. Like, there are games that are that, and they're wonderful. I love those games. But there are games that are more and can offer more. And so I love that you're bringing light to that, and it's showing the art of video games, and and the meaning behind them. It's, you know, and I'm all for it. So
well, it's such a huge part of our lives, man. I mean, it's literally the reason you and I are friends. So like,
yeah,
I mean, trying to like, it's cool. Like, it was an idea that came from an existential crisis, and it's grown into something really cool. So
absolutely,
it's really cool.
I fucking love you for it, dude.
Yeah, man, I love you too. Earlier, I meant new to the platform. The only possible way that Twitch will care about the knowledge fellowship, or EDU in general, is if we affect the platform totals even a little. We cannot just suck off the existing viewership. Sean's work off platform, plus the impact of this game and your treatment of it, made a difference. You matter. We love you. Hey, I love you too, Uncle Bill. Thanks for all the hard work you do for TKF, man. You guys have been with me from the start. 28 days, biological agent-based story equals Dr. McLive goes viral on TikTok, and there's no cure. Yeah. Willow, thank you for the 300 bits. We're like viruses when we see someone trying to use emotes and they don't go through. Well, I appreciate that. Sean, since TikTok was your idea, thanks. Because as I said earlier, I want to say some of your clips on TikTok about Joel and Ellie's relationship helped give me a newer, needed perspective of my own relationship with my goddaughter. Badass.
Love to hear that.
One thing I felt a little disheartened by in the game is that Lev's story is so tragic. Obviously, the entire story and world they live in is surrounded by tragedy and trauma, but I find it hard to find any media where trans characters get to experience even just small amounts of joy rather than a story that is purely, I'm trans and the world isn't built for me. Wish we could see a little more good in the world for Lev, perhaps in a future game. That makes sense to me, Chuck. I would be interested to hear the perspectives of trans folks on the representation of Lev in this game, because I think in one way I agree, as somebody who's not trans, like I'm gonna try not to like mansplain this, but I think to some degree seeing it represented this way is a more accurate representation based on the world that we live in. And I think if we get like to represent it as like overly like, oh, this person's successful, it has also the potential to tokenize a trans person and try to like make it this inspiring story that like maybe a person who holds that identity would look at and say that's not realistic at all right now based on like my current lived experience. But I don't think it has to be an either or, right? So like I would be curious to hear the thoughts of like trans folks on what they think about it, because I don't have that lived experience to be able to connect it to it in a like a anything other than like more of like an academic kind of way. Cassandra, thank you for the 500 bits. Just had to, after all of that, thank you for doing all you do. I've learned so much about mental health as well as new perspectives on different games. Also, thank you to Sean, because I found Dr. Mick on TikTok. The way it's presented as well as an easy way to find info on mental health. So thank you both. Sean kills it on TikTok, seriously.
Appreciate that, Cassandra.
Thank you for the 400 bits, Skater. Appreciate you. So great to have intelligent conversation about my favorite medium. It's fun to engage in that for sure. The Last of Us 2 DLC for Nintendo Switch. Lev puts on... Lev pets all the abandoned Nintendogs puppies. As a trans person, I felt like Lev's story was really relatable, and there are a lot of things he experienced that I have too. But at the same time, I wish that was more to his life than just being trans. That makes sense. Definitely don't think he needs a big inspirational story, but for sure, I think they could have found a middle ground. I appreciate you sharing that, Chuck. I really do. I think they handled him well, and with my limited knowledge of the cult, what they believed, I think they would have reacted this way. I hated having to argue with Chad over it, though. I kind of wonder if there was any significance to Lev having some hair after the time skipped, or if that was just to show passage of time. Maybe both. I feel like Lev is pretty accurate to the experience of some in the community. As a queer person and a trans woman, I agree that having more narratives where trans queer folks can just be characters and it not be about coming out. Lev is a bit of a coming out story. Yeah, for sure. I mean, seeing him dead named that overtly is like, Jesus. I agree. There are some TV shows that do a really good job with that. It's hard because, like I said, I think I said this when we were doing the run, but like, it's hard when you're watching it because there are so many things like you want to ask Lev in that moment, right? Like, I want to know, does Lev say like I think I said in the game, like we're going to treat Lev like Lev is male, so we're going to refer to Lev as male rather than trans, because trans sort of still creates a boundary between him and his gender identity. And like, I don't know if Lev would say, actually, I'd prefer to be like identified as trans, right? Like those are the types of things that I really wish. I don't know how you do it without being able to interact with him specifically, right? I feel like Lev shaved his head as a Seraphite to signify that he is in fact a boy, and I think by the time he's in Santa Barbara, he's comfortable in his identity and doesn't need to express himself in the way male Seraphite would be required to. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Also, thanks for that second hype train. Appreciate that. So yeah, I think moral of the story is that I think these games where you as the gamer don't have a choice, I think they are best enjoyed when you put yourself in the context that the game is in. And you try to understand the norms, the rules of engagement, the wider system at large. I think that helps immensely because it can help you get into the same kind of space that the characters are in instead of applying your sensibilities to it. And I think also depersonalizing these types of games is important too, that to appreciate the story for what it is, what's in front of you, what has been created, taking what happened and trying to use that to like understand the world and to see these concepts and stuff like that. I think when we over personalize it and make it about us, it detracts from the potential enjoyment of what it is that's in front of us. And I think finally it's okay to not like it, right? Like it's okay to say, you know what, this is a game that's not for me, and stop playing it midway through. That's okay, right? Like nobody's holding a gun to anybody's head saying you have to play this game. And so I think it's okay to say this isn't for me. This isn't a story that I find to be particularly fun. This is a story that makes me feel shitty. It's the same reason I'll never watch the movie Fault in Our Stars ever again. Like, that movie's just freaking sad. Like, I mean, I like that I saw it once. It happened to be Ellie and I's first official date. It was a bad movie to choose for that. But, like, I'll never watch that movie again because it wasn't fun to watch. But it was, I think, important to watch. So, yeah, it was a rough first date choice. It was. Luckily, we had like known each other and been building up to that for a while, so it wasn't like I had just gotten her number and that was where we went. Like, we knew each other enough. But yeah, that was me and Allie's first date, was Fault in Our Stars. There's a couple movies like that.
Watch once and can only watch it once.
Yeah, Requiem for a Dream's another one like that. I don't think I could watch that movie again.
No, I could not.
Technically, how would you rate the gameplay and graphics? The best I've probably seen. The graphics are incredible. The art direction and visuals of The Last of Us 2 are legitimately incredible. Absolutely phenomenal. Gameplay, I think, is dated at this point. I think Naughty Dog needs to like reevaluate their gameplay loop. It's just, to me, it just doesn't work anymore. On a happier note, how cool is it that you were able to spare Bear when you were with Ellie and then get to play with Bear as Abby? Yeah, thank God. I did my best. You always need sad so you can distinguish happy. I agree. We experience emotions relative to each other. What's your favorite movie? My favorite movie is Inception. I like basically every movie Christopher Nolan's ever made except for Dunkirk. I need to watch that movie. I need to watch that movie again because I feel like I just completely missed the point when you and I saw it.
I haven't seen it in a long time.
Like, I remember you and Justin coming out of that movie and you're like, that movie was freaking great. And I was like, I hated that movie. And I didn't want to hate it. I don't know why I hate it. Just, for me, it was so uninteresting.
You need to watch Hot Fuzz before you rewatch. If you're going to rewatch anything, you're going to rewatch Hot Fuzz. So that
could have been one of the watch parties on the incentive list, man. It's funny because as soon as you said that, my blood pressure spiked. I'm like, no. But I probably would see it differently now.
Yeah. You got to put yourself in the shoes of Nick Angel.
I know.
Real quick, I'm about to head out of here because it's almost 3:30.
Yep.
Is it Inside Out? Why I'm just completely panicked on the name of the movie.
Inside Out with all the parts and stuff?
Yeah. Well, like how they show the emotions and stuff. I remember overarching the theme of like you need sadness.
Yeah, well. Like, Inside Out is an incredibly well-crafted movie. It is a really awesome representation of like parts and internalized objects. There's a lot of they consulted with a ton of psychologists when they made that movie. That movie's excellent in terms of like representing that stuff. It's like, I mean, I showed clips of it in classes.
Yeah. Okay. I felt like that one did do it right and well,
Yep.
but obviously this is me jumping.
No, that's a good point. I didn't think of that readily, but yes, that movie is excellent.
All right.
All right, you
I'm
heading
gonna head
out,
of
man?
here.
All right.
I am. One more big shout out to chat, because you all are great and being a part of this and
Yep.
letting us do this and listening to us and contributing to this, because it's not I feel like I'm just saying it 1,000 times, but this game is a doozy. But you all are.
We made it.
We did. We made it. We're on to Detroit next on Friday, which I'm excited for that to start.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah. And seeing all the comments of people coming in from TikTok and whatnot, I love seeing that. So thank you for all the kind words about that.
How do you feel about the test situation? We didn't get enough context. Like, I don't know. I never felt super connected to Tess because we didn't get much context between the two of them. Which section was more fun, Abby or Ellie's? I don't find either of them to be particularly fun. I mean, purely from a gameplay standpoint, I would probably say Abby because she has better guns. Which part for The Last of Us drew you into the game more story world, part 1 or 2? Well, 1. I don't think I'd be as drawn into 2 without 1. I don't really know how you could play The Last of Us 2 and appreciate it as well if you haven't played 1. So 1. What are your thoughts on Abby and Ellie constantly leaving each other alive in their encounters? Because especially on Abby's side, when she had the advantage, Ellie was clearly a threat that would come back to hurt her. I just found it a bit weird. I don't think Abby's invested in killing Ellie. She has no reason to do it. And Abby bests her. Abby has no reason to kill Ellie. And she makes that clear at every point she possibly can. She says to Ellie in the theater, we let you go. She's not preoccupied by Ellie. She protects in some ways herself, and she shows Ellie that if she comes back, she's screwed. But she leaves her to live because I think by that point, Abby is trying to rectify her sense of self. I think Ellie would have killed Abby if she had the chance in the theater, but Abby was too strong. Ellie only spares Abby in the end because of all the reasons we talked about, because I think she finally realized who does she want to be, and it wasn't about killing Abby so much as it was about a sense of control over the fact that she could have. Was there any part in either game that you dreaded or didn't look forward to playing on stream? I would probably say when Yara's wings are clipped. Like that one. Oh God, everything about that is rough. Beyond that, no. What part of the 2 games did you think had the highest chance of turning Chad into a shit show? Probably either Joel's death or when the game switches to Abby after she's holding the gun to Tommy. Ellie only won the end fight because of Abby being strung up for so long. Yeah, I think I phrased my question in a wrong manner. I wanted to ask what drew you into the actual game more, like made you feel the actual character and feel the actions you do. Oh, the thing that drew me into the game for sure was when Sarah died in Last of Us 1. I mean, that literally set the tone. I was like, holy shit, I want to know what happens here. Yeah, I mean, really, that moment, I think, grabbed me more than anything else. I was hooked. I bought, like I said at the beginning of stream, I bought a PlayStation 3 because of that opening scene. I literally went to Best Buy and used a credit card to buy a PlayStation 3 I couldn't afford because I desperately wanted to play the game.